All right, so CPI, of course, dipped under 5% today. A lot happening around the global and macro aspect of whether or not we'll see more pressure on Bitcoin, ETH, all the things that we talk about here on this show. But we wanted to dive in a little deeper into more of the philosophical state of how finance and the monetary system really work globally. And one of the big thinkers that we really kind of follow here on this show is Robert Breedlove. And we're going to have him on today. So you guys are going to love this. My name is Paul Barron. Welcome back into Tech Path. Joining me today is Mr. Robert Breedlove from the What Is Money podcast. If you guys have not checked it out, go over to his website, whatismoneypodcast.com. You'll be able to subscribe, do all the cool things. But Robert, welcome into the show. Great to have you.
Hey, Paul. Thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
Yeah. So let's get into, first of all, we kind of were talking pre-show here a little bit, and I wanted to kind of just open this up to the audience a little bit in terms of the guests that you bring onto your podcast, because your podcast is quite a bit different than I think a lot of people and their listening habits. If they want to really dive down the rabbit hole, you should listen to this podcast. But let's say the last, say, 6 months, has there been one or two podcasts that has really stuck out for you that has said, wow, this is really a big topic that I need to go into deeper?
Like I was telling you pre-show, I'm very honored and privileged to have a lot of super bright guests on the show. We talk about a lot of really big ideas, and I think our podcast is cerebral and quite a rabbit hole podcast. So for those who like to go in depth, we definitely go to the extreme in that respect.
Yeah.
I did a few interviews in Jackson Hole, Wyoming that were in person. That was during the Bitcoin Ski Summit.
Okay.
Two of those were extremely impactful on me, and they were also very well received by the audience. Those are conversations with Jeff Booth. He's the
Yep.
author of a book called The Price of Tomorrow. Brilliant guy. Some people call him Bitcoin Buddha. He's very kind of spiritual in his demeanor and delivery and his
Yeah.
views. That conversation was very impactful, very well received. There was another one in the same location with Eric Kaysen. He has
Hmm.
recently published a book called Crypto Sovereignty. Brilliant guy, evaluating the implications of Bitcoin through the lens of ancient philosophers. Really, he's really big into Heidegger in particular, and pulling together all these different threads that different thinkers across history have viewed humanity as moving towards this kind of like eschatological point where there would be a massive transformation.
Right.
And, the deeper you get into the Bitcoin rabbit hole, the more likely you are to think that Bitcoin might have something to do with that. So very, very interesting lines of thinking. I've also just wrapped a series with Anish Karve. We talked about Thomas Sowell's book. As I was saying to you,
Hmm.
I think Thomas Sowell is the greatest living economist in the world. Brilliant book, great series with Anish. He's a super smart guy who actually introduced me to the book. Also have an ongoing series with Stefan Kinsella. He is an anarcho-capitalist attorney, really, really intelligently explores what a libertarian world could look like, which is something
Yeah.
we're moving towards with the emergence of Bitcoin. And tomorrow I'm headed to Miami, and I've got a lot of big ones coming up. We've got an in-person with
Cool.
Michael Saylor. We've got an in-person with Jason Lowry, who published a book called
Oh,
Soft
software.
War.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So, and many others. Everyone in the Bitcoin world is basically flocking to Miami over the next couple of weeks. So we'll
Yeah.
have a lot of big interviews coming out.
Very cool. Jeff has been on our show before. I would agree with you. He's one of the more brilliant minds in Bitcoin. Has a lot of insights to it and kind of where the potential is. Not only from a business standpoint, but from a sociological standpoint in the sense of
Yeah.
where society is going. So yeah, definitely
hmm
cruising on. And I just got through with software just a couple of weeks ago. Got a chance to read that book from Lowry, and pretty impressive, coming from a guy like him.
Yeah, it is. It is a very impressive book. I think the thesis is very well thought out, and it's controversial. Actually, it's controversial
Yes.
in Bitcoin circles and controversial outside of Bitcoin circles. However, I think the thesis has some real teeth. As
Mm.
far as I can
Yeah.
tell, there's a very important physics related, um, human beings organize themselves according to physics, really, and we change our relationship with physics through technology.
Yeah.
So it's again very much a rabbit hole book. It's a lot to get your head around, but I think it's all encompassing, really, in his views. So I would encourage people to check it out. It's a great book.
For sure. We've had quite a few people talk about it, so it's one that we're following heavily. I want to jump over to a few tweets just to kind of get your opinion on some of these areas, especially from the macroeconomic standpoint. I know you study this pretty significantly. Macro Alf, he's coming in, and he's talking about the US dollar and its global reserve currency choice. Over 80% of the global FX transactions, now 50% of global trades and payments still happening in the US dollar. Now, the question I have, and this is always the question that I think a lot of people bring up, we do a weekend of kind of like tech camps, so to speak, to teach people about blockchain and Bitcoin and self-custody and all this kind of cool stuff. But one of the big questions is whether we ever get to a point of a global reserve shift, which could be underway right now. The real question is, how long would that take? I know in many cases it may not matter, but could the US dollar still have another 20 or even 50 years in it? Or do you feel like it's going to be something that's going to happen a little quicker?
Well, not to cop out, but the hardest thing about predictions is timing, right?
Yeah.
It's everyone wants to know when these things are going to happen. I think those who live by the crystal ball are bound to eat glass. So I'm always very hesitant to put a timeline to predictions. And again, it's kind of a cop out because without a timeline, people say it's not useful. But
Well, what would
caveat
you say?
emptor,
Yeah, what would you say are
whatever.
things to watch for if you're looking at those?
Yeah,
So because
exactly.
indicators could help things go forward.
So what you can say with a high degree of conviction is that fiat currency fails. It fails in hyperinflation. There's a systemic design flaw in the implementation of money currently. And it's because it's a debt-based money and banks are lending money out in these waves of credit expansion, you always get exponentially more liabilities created in a fiat money system. And then it's also distorting price signals and causing the misallocation of capital. So when the economic tide goes out and we go into recession, you have all these unpayable debts,
Right.
like a massive slog of outstanding liabilities, and there's inadequate liquidity to cover those liabilities. So what happens is the central bank intervenes, produces more liquidity, and the cycle repeats, right? The actual production of additional liquidity causes further price signal distortion, further misallocation of capital, and drives the boom and bust business cycle. This is the crowning achievement of Mises, by the way, in 1949. This is called the Austrian business cycle theory. And so we can say with a high degree of conviction, that's how this game ends up, right? All fiat currencies end in hyperinflation, essentially, unless the country is conquered and taken over by another fiat regime. So the timing, however, is much more difficult to ascertain. I have a public prediction that I put out on Robert Kiyosaki's podcast, I think 18 to 24 months ago. And I projected and predicted that the US dollar would be hyperinflated to zero by the year 2035. Now, that prediction is based on the rate of debasement, the actual rate at which we're expanding US M2. And I've just looked at hyperinflations historically, how every time we increase the rate of production, again, it increases the misallocation of capital and everything as I described before. And so when the next round of intervention comes in, the rate of expansion tends to increase exponentially. So for instance, if you look at US M2 over the, say, 40 years prior to 2008, I think the annualized expansion was like 7%.
Mm-hmm.
You now look at post 2020 US M2 expansion. I think the annualized rate is something more like 20 to 25%.
Right.
The year 2020, I think we expanded the supply 45%. So it's not a smooth curve, but if you average it out, that's what it looks like. And so you're talking about it tripled, right? It tripled or quadrupled as a result of this one economic catastrophe. Another way to look at this is we printed $700 billion in 2008 in response to the global financial crisis. We have now printed since 2020 as a combination of both COVID and this nascent banking crisis that we're currently embroiled in,
Hmm.
somewhere in the neighborhood of $8 to $9 trillion. So you're talking about more than 10x um, the bailout package, right, or whatever whatever euphemism they want to call it. That pattern tends to continue. So I think the next economic crisis we go into, we're going to print tens of trillions of dollars. Um, so I say 2035 based on the rate of debasement. But to your point, this game could go on for many, many decades,
Yeah.
or it could happen very, very suddenly, right? Like, as I said, we're in this banking crisis currently. We don't know where this ends up. Um, and it's kind of like, I love the phrase from Ernest Hemingway when someone asked, how does someone go bankrupt? And Ernest Hemingway responded, gradually and then suddenly.
Suddenly. Yep.
So
Yep.
that's how this game plays out is we have long bouts of money printing and it doesn't really seem to be messing anything up. You know, the central banks get kind of a false confidence that they can just print money ad infinitum. But there comes an inflection point where you tip into the suddenly stage and then
Yeah.
things collapse pretty rapidly.
I don't know. I look at it in a couple of things that are happening here in our society at this point. And, if you look at post-COVID, I've seen the rise of a lot more voices on social, primarily YouTube podcasts in general, that have really started to make people think differently. And
Mm-hmm.
that's usually the first step in any societal resurrection, is to
Mm-hmm.
get the population to start thinking differently. Usually causes revolutions, causes shifts in power, in some cases even
Mm-hmm.
geopolitical shifts as a whole. Then you look at the defense mechanism that is coming in from the banking system and the traditional, you know, lawmaking system at large. Just this tweet right here, I just thought I kind of got a giggle out of this, in the sense of Bank of America says the U.S. dollar global dominance is not under threat of BRICS. Obviously, that would be their statement, because they're the
Of course,
ones
it's the
saying we
Bank of
don't want it to
America.
be. Yeah, we don't want it to be at risk. With that being the case, and to your point, if you look at the difference between the printing cycles that have happened in the past, this one being much more gargantuan that we're in
Mm-hmm.
today. Here's my question to you. Is there any way that we could get out of this through some sort of productivity, explosion, much like what we did in 2000 in the birth of the internet? It
Mm-hmm.
really exploded. It created what we know now, 23 years later, as really the birth of modern technology here in the United States, and
Mm-hmm.
maybe put us at the top of the heap in terms of innovation. Is there anything that could pull us into the future that way? Maybe AI
Well,
or something else?
yeah, no, you're intuiting a really, really good point here. So yes, basically what's happening when a central bank counterfeits currency is that they are harvesting the economic surplus that's being created in the marketplace, right? This is why I often call it theft, because
Yeah,
it's literally all it is. And you don't, when countries were going to war together, there was I think it was called the Norabito Laboratory in Japan, and they actually were concocting plans to bomb London with counterfeit London pounds so they could hyperinflate the currency and prevent
interesting.
them from being able to wage war effectively. So
Mm,
when I say it's used for theft, like it's not really a debate. Like there's no equitable economic benefit that counterfeiting currency can impart. It only benefits the counterfeiter at the expense of those using the currency, essentially. So you have the central bank harvesting the economic surplus of productive market actors through the mechanism of counterfeiting or inflation, which is the same thing. So, to your point, to the extent that we get a productivity boom through technology, right? Whether this is AI, whether this is self-driving cars, flying cars, like what choose your technology. Anything that allows us to accomplish greater results with less efforts, which is to say increases our productivity, can
right.
actually extend the runway of fiat currency and central banking
Hmm.
because there is more economic surplus being created to harvest through inflation. So people that are experiencing the pains of this theft can actually have this can actually give them, I guess, an analgesic to that pain. Right, productivity is
Right.
increasing so fast that prices would be decreasing, but the central bank, you don't feel it as much as the central bank is basically stealing from you because there's an offset through the increase in productivity. Now, to take this back to Jeff Booth's thesis, though, he argues that these two oppositional forces cannot coincide, that technology is so rapidly increasing our productivity in the digital age, and that the central banking fiat currency paradigm is contingent on ever rising prices. You need to decrease the purchasing power of each unit of currency to keep the debt structure sustainable.
Right,
So he's
right.
basically, there's these two like diametrically opposed forces in productivity enhancing technology and the need to increase prices in a debt-based monetary system that he thinks is just going to erupt. And now this could contribute to that suddenly phase of central banking being realized much earlier.
Yeah, he and I got into that very topic, and my argument, my background, of course, is in technology. Grew up in it, went to school, and eventually ended up working in that field for a long time with developers, etc. And the thing I agreed with him is, technology is deflationary. Everything eventually gets down to a very bare minimum cost unit. That's the
Mm-hmm.
whole goal of technology, is to reduce and reduce. But if you look at that, and this is a theory I have going with what I'm seeing, because we study a lot of what's happening in Capitol Hill right now around
Mm-hmm.
regulation, looking at what's happening in the EU with MiCA. And the thing I look at is, all right, maybe the US has realized they're missing a boat here. And when I say the US, meaning really the lawmakers, the best theft artisans in the world. They realize they're missing a boat here, and they're going, okay, wait a minute, we need to accelerate quickly into allowing this technology to flourish. Maybe it is the next thing, whether that's blockchain, Bitcoin, or something else in this area of Web3, et cetera. Or maybe AI. There's two I would say, competing technologies that are starting to move. The US, let's say in the next 12 months, pivots on everything. And if you look at, I'll just use this tweet right here. This is from Robert F. Kennedy. Now, his statement is, and there's there's a big movement here in Miami at the Bitcoin conference to create more of an awareness around all of this. But
Mm-hmm.
Kennedy states cryptocurrencies led by Bitcoin, along with other tech, it's a mistake for the U.S. government to hobble the industry and drive innovation elsewhere. Biden's proposal, 30% tax on crypto mining, is a bad idea. So the point being is that at some point we're going to end up with lawmakers that realize there's a lot of money to be made.
Mm-hmm.
With that kind of scenario playing into this, especially on the blockchain side, do you feel like that, back to your counterbalance of what Jeff was talking about, productivity times innovation times the power of the US dollar and the power of the US as being the global power itself militarily, does that shift this fiat system into another 50 years? Because I look at that, it's like you're stacking the deck a little bit here with a lot of interesting aspects that the US has in front of them.
Yeah, I guess it is. It's very difficult because we're in extreme uncharted territory in a lot of dimensions, right? One, we're moving from the industrial age into the digital age.
Right.
I'm a big believer in this, that there's a saying that Bitcoin could be historically regarded as the killer app of the internet. So where we sit today, most people think the internet is the major innovation of the digital age,
Yeah.
and that's going to be the thing that has transformed everything, and will continue to transform everything. However, I think there's a strong argument to be made that we could look at the internet historically, I don't know, 50 years from now, and say that was the precursor to Bitcoin, and Bitcoin was the thing that actually changed everything. And now it's hard to disentangle the two, because in a way, Bitcoin is the internet itself. The internet is a stack of open source protocols for moving information around the world without permission. We've heard of these: TCP/IP,
Yep.
HTTP, etc. It's a stack of just open protocols, open standards that we use to communicate. Bitcoin is the same thing, right? It's an open standard or an open source protocol, but rather than just moving information, Satoshi has anchored it into physical reality through proof of work
Right.
mining, and we can actually move economic value. And that's the key breakthrough. Bitcoin is the internet of money, or digital gold. We use all these analogies to try and describe it. Now, it's hard to say what the implications of that, right? And you also have the other uncharted territory we're in is this global coordinated counterfeiting of currency. We have every central bank in the world debasing at a rate we've never seen before, right? Which is another way of saying we are further along in this post 1971 world than we've ever been. Like, few realize that we're living in a global fiat currency experiment that's never been run before. It's probably the grandest socioeconomic experiment in human history. Can humans everywhere in the world centrally plan money simultaneously, right? And just ignore market forces.
Right.
And I would argue that most of the pain we're seeing in the world is a consequence of that hubristic attempt to try and centrally plan the most important market in the world, which is the market for money itself.
Yeah.
Now, you're seeing this, let's say, the state is looking at Bitcoin increasingly as an existential threat, rightfully so. And so you're seeing these weird draconian ideas being floated, like the tax on Bitcoin mining,
Right.
which, to be clear, all Bitcoin miners are doing is buying electricity at a market rate. So if you're going to tax someone that's buying electricity at a market rate to satisfy, a customer demand, well, why not do that to hair dryers or electric cars or Netflix or computers? Like,
Yeah.
you cannot legislate what an individual can buy, right? Like, you go
Not
to
yet.
work to accrete purchasing power for yourself. You can then go into the market and buy whatever you want. To try and say that this particular buyer of energy is causing some kind of social harm, right? There's always this ephemeral, the greater good is being damaged, or there's social harm being created. It's just an asinine notion. And it's remarkable to me how well the idea of expending energy has been attached to the idea of polluting the world. Like, when people say Bitcoin uses a lot of energy, they're saying it with a tone of equivalence, that using energy is equivalent to polluting the environment, which is not at all the case. These things could not be further separated, right? The more energy we use, the more we ascend the Kardashev civilizational scale, the richer we become, basically. So one of the primary aims of economics is to make energy as cheap as possible. To the extent you can make energy cheap is the extent to which you can make people wealthy, right? You can increase wealth or per capita GDP.
Mm.
That has nothing to do with polluting the environment. Polluting the environment has to do with one person violating another person's property rights. If I have a factory that makes widgets and I have this waste product that costs me money to deal with in a clean way, and I just dump it in your river,
Yeah.
well, then I've violated your property to the extent of my own profit motive. Now, the right way to deal with that is for you to have legal recourse against me. If I dump pollution in your river, you can sue me, right? That's how we deal with ecological harm and pollution. It has nothing to do with energy use. Yet somehow, in the eye of the public, I don't know if this is intentionally or unintentionally, but they've been married together. It's like, the more energy you use, the more pollution you're generating, and it's simply just asinine. So it's good to see people like RFK understanding this, tweeting about this, taking a shot at the White House, partially on this platform. It's a testament to something you said earlier, which is, in the digital age, the liquidity of ideas and information has never been higher.
Right.
So it's much harder, I think, to bullshit and hide the truth and propagandize in this new age, right? Where we have free thinkers connecting each other in a peer-to-peer way. We have a resurgence of dialogue in the digital age, right? Dialogue is how people have zeroed in on truth historically. And when we were in the 20th century, we had a loss of that because the media paradigm was very top down. It was, as when my mom was growing up, she used to say, we had channels 3, 9, and 12.
Yep.
And if the president was on TV, you were fucked. Well, now we have YouTube, we have endless podcasts. There's, information galore out there. You can go down any rabbit hole you want. And I think the collective outcome of that is a society much more centered on truth rather than on bullshit.
Yeah, for sure. Well, and I think the point, that we are seeing now is that finally, maybe for the first time in maybe over 2 decades, we've started to see a little bit of a breakaway from the mainstream media. and a lot more of these voices coming out into what now is considered the mainstream media, mostly in the decentralized platform, shows like ours and many others, podcasts,
Hmm.
etc.,
Hmm.
that have had a chance to gain a significant amount of audience. This Declaration of Monetary Independence returns. This thing is coming back to the conference here this year. So they're doing another, document for Bitcoiners, et cetera, to highlight, kind of the ideology and the independence, from monetary systems in general. And I guess, do you think this year will be one that we really do get some traction here? I know we're going to have, supposedly there's 60,000 people coming to this conference. What are your thoughts on that? Do you feel like we're going to see enough of a traction to help tilt the scale a little bit from the political standpoint? Because I think that's going to be the one vehicle that either will propel this into mainstream, where normal people start to learn about Bitcoin and other assets for the first time. Could this be the start right here? What's happening at the conference next week?
Well, I mean, the idea that is Bitcoin has been permeating broad human consciousness in more and more for years, right? That as number go up or price go up, the more
Right.
people pay attention to this thing, the more they start to ask themselves, what is this thing? And individuals start to go down their own rabbit hole journey. And that is what's so powerful. It takes a lot of work. In the Bitcoin community, the number 100 hours is thrown around as the minimum
Hmm.
requirement to understand Bitcoin. So, somewhat interestingly, there is a proof of work necessary to understand proof of work money. You can't just get it. Not, I mean, some people do get it relatively quickly, but you
Yeah,
need this interdisciplinary framework, which is a rather sophisticated mental model, let's say, to grasp the significance of Bitcoin. And so that's been happening, right? It's been happening for a long time. I think these events help amplify it, right? To actually put people in a living environment with these thinkers. I know for me, it's one thing to go on an intellectual journey. You read a bunch of books, you listen to a bunch of podcasts, you think you've got your head around Bitcoin to some extent, like you have conviction in the asset. But it's exponentially more conducive to your conviction, to the depth of your conviction, when you see other people that are super intelligent approaching this from their own unique angle, doing their own homework, and arriving independently at the same conclusion. And when you start to have this consilience among many minds reaching the same conclusion, I hate the word inevitable, but people start to say, well, look, as long as Bitcoin exists and continues to exist, and human beings continue to print money, which is all any human that's ever gained the privilege to print money has printed money until it hyperinflates,
sure.
then Bitcoin outcompetes all monetary technologies. So it feels like, the general perception on Bitcoin today is that it's a very risky bet, very speculative, unsafe place to put your purchasing power. Let's say on Wall Street, what they would call a risk-on asset, right? When risk appetites are high, you would buy something like Bitcoin that has very high price volatility. But the interesting thing is that Bitcoin is, in truth, in my view, and in the views of many Bitcoiners, it's actually the ultimate risk off asset. It's the safest thing you can possibly own. It's the asset that has the least counterparty risk imaginable. It's the strongest form of private property you can have, right? It's an asset that no one can steal from you, no one can inflate, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
So we're at this weird transitional point where the world perceives Bitcoin as a super risky, speculative, risk on asset. Yet, if you've done the proof of work to really understand money and the global monetary order, how corrupt it is, and how superior Bitcoin is from a perspective of monetary properties, then you'll come to see it as this ultimate safe haven, right? Again, the digital gold uh, metaphor holds well here, and it's competing to be that thing that we. It's a risk off, right? We go into the market and we take certain risk in the attempt to create profits, and we want to store those profits in something in savings that is sound, that is maximally insulated from those market risks that we use to obtain that purchasing power in the form of profits.
Yeah.
That's what gold was, right? Gold was this trust minimized store of value. And Bitcoin has taken the properties of gold, combined them with the economic properties of the internet, and basically perfected the properties of money. So it's giving us something, it's the most precious asset in human history, as far as I can tell. But the awareness of that fact is not broadly understood. So
Yeah.
there's an
Well, I think,
information asymmetric opportunity to do the work to understand
yeah.
Bitcoin and then benefit from the transition.
Yeah, and there are those times in history, in almost every technological, I'll say trend that became pretty much a way of life, from a society
Mm-hmm.
standpoint, had those early days of this is a fad, this is going to go to zero, all those kind of things. We've seen it in
Mm-hmm.
social, mobile, even the early
Mm-hmm.
birth years of the internet was often looked at that model. I want to flip over and go the direction of CBDCs for a second. And I want to start with a few tweets here and just a headline. This was Chinese province unveiling their digital yuan adoption plan in city. All buses now accepting CBDC. So this is happening in China. Also within China, you've got kind of what is their Skynet. I'll just zoom in on this. 700 million facial recognition surveillance cameras now. Half of the world total now and in China. So CBDC is now linked to your digital ID. So this gets back to the argument of can a CBDC at some point get turned on and then we run into problems. This, of course, coming from James Melville. This is coming in on North Carolina. House reps have now passed a bill which prohibits governments bodies from the state from accepting payments made in a CBDC. So there appears to be within the republic, here, a little bit of a pushback. We're in Florida. We're already seeing this in our own house. South Carolina is joining the fight. There's probably going to be another 10 or 15 states that do the similar things. You look at what's happening in China. Do you feel like that could ever really happen in the United States? A CBDC linked to social score, what we're doing, turn it on and turn it off kind of scenario?
Hopefully not, but hope is not a strategy. And to the extent that a CBDC is implemented in the US or any country whatsoever, is the extent to which you will see the rollout of a social credit score system a la China. You'll see surveillance, right? A loss of individual privacy. You will see selective deactivation of money, right? If you say the wrong thing in China, they will turn off your money for specific purposes, right? They might turn it off for travel or turn it off for internet access or maybe, something to curate the behavior that they do not like. You'll also see weird things, right? In China, if you say something the state doesn't like, they publicly shame you on billboards.
Right.
So they will post people's faces and names and publicly shame them in front of their peers in an attempt to create more compliance with the social credit score system. I've heard recently too that they do this in app now. Like you can see people around you, you can see their social credit score,
Man,
and you are
Minority Report.
incentivized not to interact with them. If you interact with someone with a lower score, it can actually, via osmosis, I guess, infect your score and lower it. So it's this
Yeah.
weird dystopian social engineering thing. All of that's only possible with a CBDC. Only
Yeah.
possible. Like you can't
Yeah.
do
It's
it
the only
without a
way you can control the
CBDC.
population, for sure.
It's the only
Control
way,
money.
right? So it's very Orwellian and dystopian. I hope that the constitutional republic that the United States was founded to be, not a democracy, we're a
Right.
constitutional republic, will give us some resilience against the implementation of a CBDC. It's encouraging to see the piece of legislation you just shared. I hope more states will follow suit. I myself am betting on the South and the Midwest passing similar pieces of
To be the
legislation and
core. Yeah.
protecting individual liberty, freedom, and private property. I guess you just can't. It's hard to overstate how bad it will be if you implement a CBDC because all you're doing, we know this, right? Power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
You are maximally concentrating power into the fewest hands ever in human history. So
Sure.
what do you think the outcome is going to be, right? If there's
Yeah,
seven
exactly.
governors of the Fed and they exclusively control this slave coin that I like to call US CBDCs, that I think the dollar today has like 4.5 billion users around the world. Maybe that wouldn't be the entire user base of a US CBDC. Maybe there's some, obviously individual central banks would prefer to have their citizens under their own CBDC versus the US.
Sure.
But there's an oppositional force there because a global marketplace prefers one money. There's economic advantages to be gained if everyone's operating on the same protocol, the same standard. That's why the whole world coalesced around a gold standard. That's why the current world coalesces around a US dollar standard. There's advantages
Yeah.
to be had. But that much concentration of power is something unfathomable. Right? We would never seen a technology used by 4.5 billion people concentrated into the control of seven governors or a handful of shadowy central bank shareholders. So I think if you care about your children or the future of humanity or human flourishing in general, like you have to
Mhm.
resist this thing at all cost because it will be an absolute Orwellian nightmare should it
Yeah.
succeed.
I feel like there is a bit of a light in the tunnel right now, and the reason I say that is, we've already started to see a little bit of the pullback from what I would call the woke community. People are starting to wake up to that kind of scenario. We already saw the
Mm-hmm.
pushback from, the issue with Budweiser. That in itself
Mm-hmm.
kind of gave me hope that, humanity is got a brain of what's
Mm-hmm.
happening really within these organizations. Because in so many cases, you get these just these really more signals, social signals, than actual theory of what they're trying to do as a whole. So maybe, to your point, the republic will truly stand for what it is and let each state kind of deal with these things as they come. Last question to you is the bank failures. If you look at 2008, we had a lot of banks that failed in 2008. Now we've already started to clip this in terms of
Mm-hmm.
total value, that essentially three banks, First Republic, Silicon Valley, and Signature, all of which have now met the total of around half a trillion in failure. Do you think that this is just getting started? I'm getting different feedback from different economists and different banking experts. What is your theory on the banking system as it is now?
Well, this is the nature of fractional reserve banking.
Hmm.
There's nothing surprising here at all. Um, I There does seem to be an element of controlled demolition, perhaps.
Mm,
That again, if a central bank is going to roll out a CBDC, if the Federal Reserve, let's be more specific, is going to roll out a CBDC, which obviously they're launching Fed now in July,
right.
that's kind of like
Yeah.
a precursor to what could become a US CBDC. The number one impediment between the Fed and that goal is the commercial banking sector, right?
Banking.
That people have
Yeah.
options. They don't need to opt into the centralized currency. They can maintain deposits with their local banks. And there's more of a hierarchical system versus this extremely siloed and centralized CBDC model. So I don't think it is a coincidence that depositors are being explicitly guaranteed at large banks, right? At Bank of America,
Herded.
JPM,
Yeah.
Goldman, et cetera. Interest rates continue to be hiked, right? We just had another 25
25.
bips
Yep.
hike recently in atrocious economic conditions. Like we've never really seen the Fed do this. They would typically be lowering rates in current conditions.
In this kind of condition. Yeah.
So So that's further incentivizing depositors to move into treasuries, right? Something that's more fewer throats to choke, let's say, for the state
Hmm.
or the central bank. And in doing so, moving depositors out of the commercial banking sector, you're actually destroying that impediment, that primary impediment to the implementation of US CBDC. So I think the banking crisis itself is unsurprising. Again, it's the nature of fractional reserve banking to go into crises like this, as we described at the top of the show. It produces more liabilities than the liquidity can ever satisfy. So you get into these exacerbated booms and busts. But perhaps being accelerated or even engineered a bit um, with this demolition of the U.S. commercial banking sector, and that's extremely concerning to me. I don't know where we go from here. I really don't. I think the one thing, to reiterate something we said at the top of the show, is the one thing I have deep conviction in is that all roads lead to more money printing.
Yeah.
The only way these guarantees can be provided, the only way that depositors can be made whole, the only way FDIC can ever actually ensure what is it, 18 trillion dollars of deposits, and the FDIC has 1% of those assets that it claims to insure.
Yeah.
All of these things necessitate more money printing to provide stability to this inherently fragile system. So, in that world where we get more and more money printing, you want to own the things that cannot be counterfeited, chief among them being physical gold or Bitcoin.
Yeah, 21 million. Well, this I think that I have a little bit of hope for that, in the sense that if this had happened in the 1970s, because of the control of media, the control of
Mm-hmm.
society not really being able to interact with each
Mm-hmm.
other, I think it would have been a slam dunk. Now, I
Right.
agree with you. I think there is a little bit of a herding approach. We've talked about it here on our show, thinking that maybe there's 5 or 6 major banks here in the U.S. within the next 18 months. If
Mm-hmm.
that were to happen, then you're right. The potential of a CBDC, of turning on and off, a digital money, would be much more likely. The question, I think, will be whether or not candidates like RFK, or if you look at others out there, you look at even just what Elon and Tucker are doing on a new platform here with Twitter. There could be some very interesting plays that start to open eyes of Americans, I think, in general, and maybe the rest of the
Mm-hmm.
world, to what's really happening. So, and of course, voices like yourself, out there just spreading the news, which is the good
Yeah,
part.
I mean, I hope it helps. Obviously, I find deep fulfillment in this work. I love to add value to people's lives and capture some value for myself in the process. To make your passion your paycheck is
Mm.
very fulfilling. However, I'm also pretty realistic about this, and I think that it's really pain that causes people to move. Like, maybe there's some
Exactly.
people listening to us and they are learning, and great, that's wonderful. But the real massive movements of people occur when you have things like lockdowns and all these other
Yep.
violations of human rights and liberties. And unfortunately, I think there's more of that on the horizon, right?
Yeah.
We have to remember that every dollar printed is proof of purchasing power stolen. So
Yeah.
the more that theft occurs, and the more the purchasing power that is stolen is recycled into state-sponsored psyops like wokeism,
Mm-hmm.
you're just going to see people hopefully wake up more. I mean, it definitely captures a certain cohort of people, but it also awakens a certain cohort of people. Like, something's not right here. This doesn't make sense. Something doesn't feel right.
Yes.
And that pushes them into these rabbit holes that we're describing as hopefully a means for gaining a better understanding of what's happening in the world.
Yeah, my hope, though, with the United States is that Americans will be able to recognize those signals early enough. If you look at people, I have many friends in Lebanon who did not recognize this, got their money
Mm-hmm.
trapped. We've seen this in Venezuela. We'll see this in Argentina.
Yeah.
These are normal signals that you would think modern citizens that are technologically sound and understanding what's going on in the world would recognize these things and be able to get out. That's my concern,
Yeah.
is that we may have so many trapped within that system that they may not get out in time, and we end up getting by default, what we so desperately don't want, which is a CBDC. It's kind of like
Yeah.
rats to a
Well,
potential area.
yeah, we've never seen currency failure in the United States, right? At least
Exactly.
not in anyone's lifetime.
Lifetime. Yeah.
So, what did Schopenhauer say? That every man takes the limits of his field of vision for the limits of reality. And hopefully, by looking beyond your own life into the history of money, you'll understand that these things do happen often, and they're
Yep.
always gradually, then suddenly, and you'll prepare yourself accordingly. Otherwise, you're going to have to learn through the pain, and that's a much
Yep.
more expensive way to learn.
Yeah, for sure. Robert Breedlove, great to have you on the show. Thank you so much for jumping in today. Hopefully, I'll catch you at the conference next week. I'm going to be down there a couple of days, so I'll say hi if I see you. But great to have you in.
Awesome,
Thanks
Paul.
for stopping in.
Thank you for having me, and I'll see you in Miami.
Excellent. All right. So you guys are maybe listening to the podcast side of this. Make sure and jump over here to the YouTube channel, catch the full video. And of course, you get a chance to do one other thing, and that is join our Diamond Circle. That's our own private email. It's our way of being able to communicate to you directly and also provide you some additional content. Stuff that I do on my own personal podcast, we'll drop in there. We do additional analysis, all kinds of things that I think you guys will like just by clicking the link down below. Of course, if you want to catch me out there on Twitter, it's @Paul Barron. We'll catch you next time right here on TechPath.